Turn your Bibles, if you will, to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. And this is a classic story, actually. I think it's sometimes good to focus on some of those classic Bible stories and actually, integrate yourself into the story. So often, I think when we're kids, we can kind of almost start looking at Bible story as being just kind of a nice story. But this actually happened. These things that we see in Scripture actually happened. And this is an amazing story. We're actually going to go through the entire chapter, and then I'll just draw some insights from it here. It says, beginning in verse 1, it says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 3 score cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. So this is pretty big, pretty huge. And he set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. You see, this guy's got an ego problem. He's pretty high in his own supply. When the princes, the governors, and the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth down, who falleth not down and worshipeth, shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at the time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And there were certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harps, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made well. But if ye worship not, ye should be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver thee out, or deliver you out of my hands? That's a pretty arrogant thing. I mean, this guy really thinks that he's literally the center of the universe. He is the guy. And that's a pretty bold thing for him to say. He's not used to being challenged. But there's the reply of the men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, that's a really key phrase there. Be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen and their hats, their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the fire exceeding hot, the flames of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. And he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. It's interesting that he recognized that, actually. Whoa. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes and governors and captains and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was the hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their body, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. It's a pretty phenomenal story, actually, when you think about it. Pretty amazing. And we see a bunch of things. We first of all see the arrogance of the king. You know, he's just awful. Like he literally, from a human perspective, he really was the most powerful person that existed at that time, literally. And he started believing like his own delusions. I mean, he's being worshipped all the time, and God knew that Nebuchadnezzar needed to be tuned in. And it would be amazing. It'd be so hard, actually, to be a Christian and work actually with Nebuchadnezzar, this guy who is just so arrogant and just full of all this, just this delusion. And then there's the politics here. There's these jealous tattletales who are wanting, really just, they're looking at what these guys are doing, and they're saying, okay, so we can probably take this position if we tattletale on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so that's what they do. They go before the king. They say, guess what's happening? These people are not worshiping you like we are. And we're so much better than these guys, and you need to do something about this. And again, because Nebuchadnezzar is so, he's so arrogant, he's like deeply offended at this. It's like, you guys are not worshiping me? And so he takes them, like right away, like impulsively, and it's almost as though like he doesn't want to lose them, because if it's like are these guys dense? But if I lose them, then I'm gonna have to reorder everything, and so he gives them a second chance. He's like, okay, guys, come on, and so he explains it again, guys. You need to when the trumpets sound, you guys need to do this, okay? When the music is playing, you guys need to do this. And these guys are resolute. They're like, you know what? No, we are going to serve God. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know, I've wondered sometimes what motivated Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It certainly wasn't popularity. You know, they weren't there because, well, let's gain popularity so we can gain political prestige, so we can have influence. And maybe this would have been a temptation that went through their mind. We don't have to really worship at the idol of Nebuchadnezzar. We don't really have to. We can just kind of go along with it. We'll bow down before the idol, and God knows our hearts, and it's fine. If they would have done that, they would have completely lost their witness. People would have looked at that and been like, a bunch of hypocrites. They say that they worship God, and God would have actually seen it and seen that what they were doing was evil. You're not supposed to do this. I mean, it's in the law. You're not supposed to. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. I am the God that you worship. And so they're forced into this corner by this evil, impulsive, arrogant, egotistical maniac. And they stand strong. What was it that motivated them? Well, it's the same thing that motivated Jesus Christ. It's the same thing that motivated Joseph. It's the same thing that motivates any person that decides in a tough situation that they're going to serve the living God. It's a deep love for God. You see, that's what actually should be the deepest motivation. Fear of the Lord and love of the Lord are actually very, very closely tied together. They're almost like they're two sides of the same coin. These guys loved the Lord and they feared the Lord. And they said, we will not do this. And I love the phrase that they say here, but if not. In other words, we're going to do this thing. We're going to go through, if that's what God has for us, we're going to go through the fire. And if he delivers us, great. But if not, it doesn't matter. We're going to do the thing that he's called us to do. You know, that's the thing, that's the sort of attitude that characterized Christ in the garden. You know, he was willing to go through and do the hard thing. And actually, it was a different situation because he knew exactly what he was going to have to go through, and he still went through it. Joseph, he could have given in to temptation. He could have said, you know what, Potiphar's wife is tempting me, and oh man, it would bring me political, it would give me pleasure, it would give me political power if I did this thing, but he says this, he says, no, how can I do this sin against God? That was the thing that motivated him, was a deep love for God. How much does it take you? How much does it take for you to compromise? You know, I remember the pressure when I was working to just be like the other guys. Conversations that we'd have, you can imagine what it would be like at a table, a bunch of, blue-collar guys talking about whatever. Talking about things that was not for mixed company. And the temptation is to join in, actually, in the thing. So that you don't stand out like a sore thumb. So you kind of just hide. So you just kind of blend in. That's the natural thing to do. The expedient thing to do. How much does it take for you and I to compromise? You see, another thing that I see about these guys is that they had an optimistic view of God and his promises. You notice that they didn't just give themselves up. Be like, you know what? We're going to burn. Yeah. They're just kind of, there was an optimism. It's like, okay, so God actually can do this, and it's very likely that he will, but if he doesn't, it was like that was like the secondary thing. It wasn't like the primary thing. Like, okay, yeah, we're probably toast, actually, right now. It was like, no, they actually first and foremost believed that God could deliver them. I think so often we're the other way around. We're not like them. We don't have this optimistic view of Christianity, of faith. We don't, actually. We're like, oh, I guess, when some trial comes in to our lives, we're like, oh, yeah, I guess that's it. Because we don't see any way through the thing with our own human wisdom. And so we fall into this sort of depressive sort of state. Like, oh, this is, I guess, what's going to happen. You just kind of give up. You don't even struggle with it. We don't even turn to the Lord and ask for a miracle, believing that he's actually able to do it. That's the kind of faith that these guys had. And that's the kind of faith that God actually wants us to have as well. To have an optimistic view of what God is able to do. We have every right to have that, actually. You know, God's not, again, we talked about in the service earlier, this morning, this afternoon, earlier today. So often we are pessimistic and we think that we're just defeated and marginalized and just we cower when we should be looking at ourselves through the lens that God looks at us through the lens that God looks at us with. We should be optimistic and say, no, God is actually able to do that. He's actually able to save people today, and He's doing that. And I find that I've been around people, and I actually don't like being around them too much. Pastors who are just, they're so depressed. They're so pessimistic. It's like, well, we're just hanging on by our fingertips, man, and it's sure a bummer to follow Jesus. They wouldn't actually exactly say that, but there's not this joy. This is just a pessimism about life in general. And that grates on me. When I hear that, when I sense somebody going that way, it actually riles me up. Because I'm like, don't you understand who we are in Jesus? Don't you understand what the resurrection means? It means we're victors. We're actually overcomers. We have the ability to do everything that God has called us to do. And that's the way that we should be living. That's the way that we should be thinking. And that's the kind of mindset that these guys had when they're faced with literally the biggest challenge of their life. They had no idea. We look at the story and we're like, oh yeah, I know that one. Yeah. And God delivers them and it's good. Yeah, it's great. They had no idea. They had an optimism, and deeper than that, there was this love for God that made them courageous. And I think that's what's actually lacking in our churches. We do not love God deeply, and so we're not courageous. We're not willing to stand for the truth. I'm going back to the message that like last week's message, or what was it? Yeah, you get last Sunday morning's message. That idea of just being courageous Christians who love Christ. And that's what these guys did. And because of their courage, because of the fact that they stood up and they took that step of faith and said, God, we are going to stand. Could you imagine the social pressure upon them? It's hard to stand out just among the people that you know and you're friends with. Never mind political adversaries who are gunning for your position. People who could kill you, like the king, for instance. It's hard to stand up among your peers and take a stand. Could you imagine standing up against the king, against this entire system? You, little old minister you, standing up there and saying, give me your worst. It's actually, one of the things that's actually really powerful about this is that those three guys stood together. I think we sometimes underestimate, some people's personality, they're more lone rangers, I have a tendency to be a little bit like that sometimes, There's something kind of romantic about being out there in the wild and just, the man's man, he's out there and he's out there in the wild, there's that kind of that sort of like cowboy sort of mentality or whatever. But God actually has not designed us to be exactly like that. He's actually designed us to be in community. That's why the church is so important. Because when somebody else is next to you has a backbone, and like everybody's kind of like mutually like together, like we're in this together. There's actually this incredible strength that comes from community. It's like, I know that person's got my back. And those guys, I'm sure this was not just like this flippant thing. It's like they show up into the place, they're like not sure what's going on. Oh, I guess he's got that big thing. No, they've been preparing this thing for a while. And they had to think about this. Guys, what are we going to do? Do you know what's really interesting? There was a ton of different Jews that had been taken captive. Where were these guys? They all got taught the same thing. They all knew what they were supposed to do. They knew the law. They knew that they weren't supposed to worship God or worship any false god. They were supposed to worship the one true God. Where were they? These guys bind themselves to doing the right thing, and they find community among themselves. They say, no, we're going to do this together. We're going to do the right thing, and it doesn't matter. There's something, like that's like good risk-taking right there. There's something so exciting about the life of faith. Man, we could fail at this. Yeah, we could. What if we start a church and it falls apart? What if we go forward and we do this event and nobody shows up? Well, what if? We're gonna do the thing. Why? Because we believe in God. We love Christ, and we're going to step out by faith. And do you know what the Lord does is He honors faith. And sometimes He lets us fall apart. But we have to have that optimism because God has promised to the New Testament church, if we abide in Him, we will bear fruit. And so we need to be courageous. We need to step out. We need to have a mindset of courage like these men did. And God looked down and He saw what they were doing and He said, you know what? I'm going to honor their faith. And you know what? God honors faith. He does. He rewards faith. And He wants you and I to be trophies of His grace, to be altars upon which the fire of God can burn. You see, the glory and the power, these guys did not deliver themselves. It wasn't that they just like mustered up enough courage and just like kind of from looking inside to suddenly, they were impervious to the flames. No, they were looking unto Jesus and they're saying, Jesus, unless you show up and save us, we're toast. And you know what God did? He actually showed up the person of Christ actually literally showed up in the middle of the fire and protected them. That's what I want to be the testimony of your life. That's what I want the testimony of Hinton Baptist Church to be. It may go down in history that the people at Hinton Baptist Church, they dared greatly because they believed in their God. And it didn't matter if they failed. It didn't matter if they got ridiculed. They went after Christ. God will honor that. And He has been honoring that. You think of the different people that have been saved this year already. Is that because of us? No, that's because God has honored us as we've stepped out. And we need to continue to do that. Because our God is able to deliver even in circumstances that seem absolutely impossible. What is God calling you to do as an individual? What is that next step that you think of as being an impossibility? And deep down in your heart, I'm supposed to do this thing, but it just seems so impossible. I couldn't actually, there's no actually physical way for me to make this happen. I can't actually see breakthrough. And yet you sense that God is calling you to something. What is that? And are you willing to take that step? Are you willing to walk by faith? Are you willing to go on the adventure of a lifetime and step out? And that doesn't mean that there's not going to be times where you're hurt and times where you're beaten up and bruised. You look at Jesus Christ and the person of Christ. I mean, what an incredible life that He lived, but what a devastatingly hurtful experience it was as well. The Son of God was crushed, and that was a part of the plan. But you think of the souls that were reached. Because Christ said, I'm going to die for these people. I will give my life a ransom, and someday Jesus Christ will receive the reward of His suffering. There will be millions of people in heaven singing, Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty, worthy is the Lamb that was slain. Because Christ was willing to go through the pain, the fire of affliction. And that's honestly what He was calling these guys to do. Thankfully, He delivered in the fire. But He doesn't always deliver in the fire. And it's that heart, that but if not, that drives us forward with an intense love for the world that Christ himself has for us. Let me ask you, are you willing to give yourself to the gospel? Are you willing to give yourself to the cause of Christ? There's no other thing. I'm living, there's fullness of joy in what I'm doing. And I want to invite you. I don't know if there's somebody here that maybe God is calling and saying, I want you to do this. And maybe there's been this battle that's been going on in your heart. You say, but if I do it, it could destroy me. The question is this: is he worthy? Is he worthy? Man, maybe it will hurt you. I don't know. I don't know the future, and these guys didn't. But is the Lamb of God worthy of your sacrifice? And over, men have gone through that, and they've said, yes. We've talked about it before, but Nate Saint and those guys, they broke open a region of the world, and there were many souls that were saved because of the sacrifice of those men. They flew into this unknown territory, they landed their airplane, and they gave their lives. And because they gave their very lifeblood, the world was opened up. That part of the world was opened up. And I have a friend of mine who's actually visited one of the guys in the tribe who threw the spear and killed those men on that beach. And he's saved. And he's sharing his testimony because somebody said, but if not, I will give my life for the cause of Christ. Do you have that kind of attitude? Are you ready? Are you willing to give your life for the cause of Christ? Now, I don't know how the Lord may have used this message, but these men are a challenge to me. The more I grow in my walk with Christ, the more I realize that there's nothing else really worth living for. There's nothing else. Everything will burn. My own body will deteriorate. It will disappear. I will lose the ability to run and to jump. But if what I invest my life into today, the cause of Christ, that will live forever. It will live far beyond me. That's the only thing worth living for. And I pray that God would continue to consume me because he is a consuming fire. Burn away the dross within my own life because there's still a lot of it. But if not, practical faith in the midst of the fire, do you have that kind of faith? Are you willing to be tried in the fire? Let's close in prayer.